Hi, I'm Ben, and today I'm going to go over a photo that I just shot. If you haven't already been here, this is my website. If you go over to the blog, I made a new post, and this one is music related. And I don't have any photos that are music related, so I knew I was going to need to shoot that after work. So it was golden hour. First, it was going to be just a normal shot of me holding my headphones, kind of like a typical artsy shot. Instead, my roommate Ankit was like, "Oh yeah, you can air guitar it." I'm like, "Oh, you know what? That is a good idea." And so that was the whole vibe of this shoot. What I did was I imported everything, brought it into here. There's this shot, and this is already edited. Actually, I just copied over a previous template from the Quebec. Didn't like how this turned out, so this is the original. The idea behind this is I was shooting wide. I didn't actually think that it was going to be vertical in the end, but I did a bunch of different things. I found that my knees were bent, I liked that better than if they were out. Mostly because I got better air, and it always was awkward when I was doing this. So these ones are good. We took a few shots, and I set it up on a tripod so I could have Ankit, who doesn't necessarily have the photography experience. So I had it shoot really fast as well, so he could set the autofocus and then just hold the shutter button, and it would be. So we have this, and then we have that shot. The best one that worked was this shot. I liked it. It kind of perfectly framed me in the buildings. So that's what I was going for from the beginning, and it worked. It just took how many shots? It took 105 items are selected, excluding the first test shots. So it took 108 shots to get this shot, but that was a lot of just spray and pray. But there was some logic to it. So what I did here, if we go back to the beginning, first I imported it. As you can see, this is the original photo. It was wide, which is what I wanted from the beginning, but in the end, I think it worked out better to just be vertical. So that's what I did. First, I adjusted the shadows, brought down the highlights. I'm just going to go through the history here. I adjusted the clarity. I always end up putting it a little bit lower. A lot of people put it higher. I prefer putting it lower because it gives it a bit less busyness to the image, just subtly at least. I increased the vibrance, always enable the remove chromatic aberration, enable lens profile. So this actually didn't work. Yeah, I don't think this did anything to actually remove it. Then I increased the sharpening. I added a bit of vignette, but don't get carried away when you add vignette. I'm obviously in the middle here, so I think it really works for this image. Now, here's something that people don't do on the Sony cameras, and I like doing. Under calibration, I adjust the processes. So this adjusts the red, green, and blue primary colors. So you can fool around with this and create some really artsy shots just without touching anything else. So I'm going to click through. This is adjusting the red, and I kind of went back and forth a bit, but in the end, I cleaned up my history. That changes it just subtly. And then we're going to go with the crops. I was originally thinking, I'm like, okay, well, what if I just cut it from super wide to this? It didn't really work. So then I'm like, okay, let's make it vertical. So over in the corner here, you'll see a rock vanish. So really, it was just a simple spot removal. There was nothing fancy. I just took the brush and went. I just felt like it was a bit distracting. I guess now that I'm looking at it, it's kind of cool, but it's just off the frame, so I didn't like it. There's no real logic to that. It's just something I did. Adjusting sharpness. I did fool around with the angle, and I know the final image is actually a bit off, and that's fine. Here's where it starts becoming an actual edit. All of those subtleties were good because they made it go from this to this. Okay, so the next step was fooling around subtly, yet again, with the image. So I wanted to bring up the exposure, but not too much. I added a radial filter. So this is just me adding it first. When I have a radial filter and I don't know if it's adjusting the inside or the outside of that radial filter, so the circle or the oval, I usually just crank down the exposure and then I know what it's adjusting. So I'm like, oh yeah, I wasn't mistakenly making the center black when I meant for it to create a vignette on this part of the image. This is me fooling around with some filters. What I'm doing here is I already had added a vignette around the actual edges. So around here, 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 and here. But what I do when there's a subject in the shot sometimes is I specifically brighten up the subject around here-ish. So in this case, if we go to the radial filter in the end, so this is the very end image here, this is the radial filter in the end. All it's doing actually is bringing the exposure down by 0.33. That's what I felt was right. And so it adds on a radial filter. So this is me fooling around with the radial filter. The other thing I did was I added a graduated filter. So this is at the bottom here. And what it was doing down here without the filter is it was distracting. You didn't know where to look. Yes, it's pretty prominently like there's a subject there, but you really want your eye to be drawn up there. So what I did was I put a graduated filter and I brought down the exposure yet again. I was also bringing down the highlights at the same time, but I kind of like the streak of light down there. Then I'm just making a few more radial filter adjustments, and same with the clarity. Actually, this is where I'll go into it. I'll switch to the end edit, and you'll notice between here and here, if I flip back and forth, you'll see that my face and my legs look a little bit different. So here are a few different things. These are the brush tool that you'll see 3 different dots. First, I believe the first one was this. So this, yep, this was the first one. And it doesn't have to be perfect because it doesn't have to be, like, that's a fact. So you can see my adjustments over here on the right. So I upped the shadows because it's pretty dark. I didn't have a reflector or a third person or even a second person to hold a reflector. I had the reflector on the shoot, but it just wasn't possible. The light was fading really quick. So either way, we were focused more on my expression and the framing of the shot. So we shot it in RAW, luckily, because we can bring back some of that detail without too much noise. Again, this is for web though, and even if I was printing this off, this is still really adequate. There's tons of information there. What did I shoot at? I shot at 1/1250 is what I shot at, and it was shot at 2.8 just because I wanted that nice bocaliciousness, and 200 ISO. Wanted a little bit of playroom there, just to up the shutter speed just by a bit, just to make sure I was still. Actually, even in the final shot, you can see that because it was moving so fast, this is blurry. Everything else is totally fine. And I'm shooting on the A7S, which is only 12 megapixels, and then we made this vertical, so there's actually not a lot of detail in this image. But again, no one cares. It's the internet. It's not super high res. I would print this out. It's totally fine. It's about the actual shot rather than the megapixels. If I knew I was going to do it this way, then maybe I would have shot vertically, but I didn't. So, okay. So back to my brushes. What you'll see here is I lowered the clarity by quite a bit because my face, I didn't necessarily like the texture that was coming off of it. So I lowered the clarity. I also raised the sharpness. So I always end up raising sharpness on the subject in most of my photos. Back over to the brushes. As you can see here on the sliders in this area, so right around my face and my hands and just kind of my mid torso area, I increased the sharpness, which I do typically on my subjects in photos, and I reduced the clarity yet again. I like reducing the clarity, but you'll see I actually increase it somewhere else in just a moment, just not on the face. Makes it kind of look not what I want. You can fool around with the clarity adjustment slider and you'll see what I mean. I decreased the clarity everywhere because I didn't like the texture on my face. It almost airbrushes it. It's nice. It's less distracting. So shadows, I increased because it was pretty dark. So I needed to lighten it up. I even did a bit more work in a second. So the second one I added was this. Now this is actually increased clarity. I told you it was coming. This is increased quite a lot. I love the texture of jeans and I wanted it to just pop. So it does because I added clarity and nothing else. So again, it covers the jeans and my shirt, so the textures of the shirt, and it just brings out the fibers. It's pretty cool. And then the third one, this is just on the shadow side of my face. On the dark side of my face, I increased both the exposure and the shadows. Again, subtly, but it just makes a difference because before it's just pure black, and it's just nice to be able to see into my eye. My eye is still even really dark, even though I've already done adjustments on shadows once, then twice, and then also the exposure. So there you have it. That's the end of the image. I fooled around with the cropping, radial filters, brush, a graduated filter. The calibration down here was key as well. And I guess I didn't even touch on the basic adjustments that I did, which is just raising the exposure a bit. I did touch on that. I did lower the highlights just to decrease the contrast a bit. And then I upped the shadows, again, to decrease the contrast and give me a little bit more wiggle room. So there was a lot of dynamic range used in this photo. And then decrease the clarity and increase the vibrance. No saturation. I didn't even notice that. All right, well, there you have it. That is a quick quick breakdown, at least quick for me, breakdown of this photo. If you want to see more breakdowns of other random photos that I take, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, you can subscribe and that'll make me happy. And if you could like the video, don't dislike it. But if you can like it, tap that like button. All right. Have a great one. Bye.